It was just another Tuesday afternoon when I walked through the door of our apartment. The smell of spaghetti sauce filled the air, and I smiled for a brief moment, thinking about the evening ahead. Lily and I would have dinner together, catch up on her school day, and maybe I could squeeze in some time to relax before getting ready for another long day at the bank tomorrow. My life was a delicate balancing act: work, bills, groceries, and everything else that comes with being a single mother. But I managed. However, something felt off today. The apartment was eerily quiet. Usually, I could hear the sound of Lily's cartoons blaring from the living room or the faint shuffle of her little feet as she played with her toys. But today, nothing. No giggles, no calls of, "Mom!" Just an unsettling silence. "Lily?" I called out, dropping my purse and briefcase by the door. My voice echoed in the emptiness, but there was no response. I hurried toward the living room, glancing around, trying to get a sense of what was wrong. Still, no sign of her. I moved to the bedroom, where I found Lily lying on the bed, curled into a ball, her face hidden in the pillow. "Lily," I whispered, walking over and sitting beside her. My heart clenched in my chest. She didn't stir, and for a moment I thought maybe she was asleep. But the heavy silence between us told me otherwise. I placed a hand on her back gently, feeling her small body shake with soft sobs. The tears stung my eyes, but I fought them back, trying to stay calm for her. "Sweetie, what's wrong?" Lily lifted her head, her red eyes filled with pain. She didn't look at me right away, instead staring at the ceiling as if she was lost in a world of her own. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "I don't want to go back to school tomorrow, Mommy." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had no idea what was happening, but I could feel the dread creeping up my spine. "Why don't you want to go back, honey?" I asked softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. Lily hesitated before speaking again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, he says I'm stupid, that I'm ugly. He took my lunch today, Mommy. He won't let me play with anyone." My stomach dropped. My breath hitched in my throat as I tried to process what she had just told me. Jake was a boy in her class, one of the popular ones, always surrounded by friends, always so confident. I couldn't believe he was the one making Lily feel this way. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. No one should treat you like that. But I promise you, we're going to fix this," I said, my voice shaking with the raw emotion of it all. Lily sniffled and nodded, but I could see the weight of it in her eyes. Something was broken inside her, and I had failed to notice. My thoughts raced as I tried to make sense of the situation. How had I missed this? I worked so hard, always trying to provide, always focused on keeping everything afloat, but I had completely overlooked my daughter's pain. How had I let this happen? I could feel the anger rising in my chest, and my mind swirled with frustration. How could Jake do this? How could the school not intervene? Why didn't I know? The questions kept coming, faster and faster. I stood up abruptly, pacing the room as my heart thundered in my chest. The weight of the truth settled heavily on me. This wasn't just a schoolyard squabble. This was real. My daughter was hurting, and no one had stepped up to protect her. No more. I turned back to Lily, who was still curled up on the bed, looking so small, so fragile. I knelt beside her again, taking her hand in mine. "Lily, listen to me. You are not stupid. You are not ugly. You are strong and beautiful, and I will not let anyone make you feel otherwise. We're going to handle this together. Do you understand?" Lily looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. She nodded slowly. The tears I had been holding back finally spilled over, but they weren't just for Lily. They were for me, too. Tears of guilt, of anger, of frustration. But most of all, they were tears of determination. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not for Lily. Not for any child who had to suffer in silence. I took a deep breath and wiped my eyes. I'm done being quiet. I knew what I had to do next. I wouldn't just sit back and let my daughter suffer any longer. I would fight for her. No more excuses, no more brushing things under the rug. I would go to that school tomorrow, and I would make sure Jake knew that he would never get away with this again. This wasn't just about defending Lily, this was about standing up for what was right, and I wasn't going to stop until justice was served. Tomorrow the fight would begin. It's funny how quickly things change. One minute I'm just a mother trying to keep it all together, and the next I'm diving headfirst into a battle I never expected, fighting for my daughter's dignity against a system that seemed too indifferent to care. But that's exactly what I was facing now. After the tearful conversation with Lily, I was determined to take action. I knew where I had to start. At the school. I wasn't going to stand by while my daughter got bullied. I wasn't one to back down easily, not after everything I had fought through in my life. But this was personal. This wasn't just another bad day. This was my baby being hurt, and I would not let it slide. The next morning, I dressed quickly, the sound of my heels clicking against the hardwood floor as I rushed to get out the door. I barely had time to grab coffee, but it didn't matter. I had one goal in mind: to fix this. I arrived at the school, my mind racing. The air inside the building felt sterile, like I was walking into a factory where the lives of kids were reduced to numbers and statistics. It shouldn't have felt so cold, but it did. I walked up to the front office, my heels clicking with purpose. The secretary barely looked up as I introduced myself. "I'm Jessica, Lily's mom. I'd like to speak to her teacher about something important." "Sure," she said, hardly looking at me. "Take a seat. Mrs. Carver will be with you shortly." I sat down, trying to steady my nerves, but the tension in my chest kept building. The thought of Lily coming home every day in tears, suffering in silence, it tore me apart. And now I was about to face the woman who could either help fix this or make it worse. I hoped for the best, but I was bracing for the worst. A few minutes later, Mrs. Carver, Lily's teacher, entered the office with a half-smile on her face. She looked to be in her mid-40s, wearing a blouse with a floral pattern that looked more like it belonged in a garden than a classroom. Her tone was warm, almost too warm, like she had rehearsed this greeting 100 times. "Hi, Jessica. How can I help you today?" I smiled tightly. "It's about Lily. She's been having some issues at school. She's been bullied." Mrs. Carver's smile faltered just slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, I see. Well, kids can be tough on each other at that age. It's pretty common for them to have disagreements, but it's nothing they can't work out themselves. Lily just needs to ignore Jake. He's a popular kid, and sometimes that brings out the worst in others." I froze. Ignore Jake? I bit down hard on my lip, feeling a hot flush rise in my cheeks. "Excuse me? Just ignore him? Is that really the solution?" Mrs. Carver blinked, her demeanor shifting slightly. "Well, yes. It's really not unusual for kids to tease one another, especially if they're close in age and vying for attention in a classroom setting. Jake is very well liked by the other kids and does well academically. Sometimes these things work themselves out if Lily just stays away from him." I felt my hands ball into fists at my sides, and I had to stop myself from slamming my palms onto her desk. "Are you telling me that my daughter is supposed to just accept being bullied because Jake is popular? Because he has good grades?" My voice was steady, but there was a simmering anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Mrs. Carver's smile faltered again, but she kept trying to smooth things over. "I understand that this is upsetting, but I really think Lily needs to develop thicker skin. This is a part of growing up. Sometimes ignoring the problem is the best way to deal with it." I didn't want to hear any more. This wasn't a lesson in resilience. This wasn't a phase. This was Lily being hurt, and the school, her teacher, was giving me excuses. I stood up abruptly, not caring about the polite conversation I had hoped for. This is not just a phase. This is bullying, and it's affecting my daughter. I'm not going to sit here and let you trivialize it." Mrs. Carver's face reddened slightly. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but this is how we handle things here. If you want, we can schedule a meeting with Jake's parents, but I didn't need a meeting with his parents. I needed action. I needed to take control of this situation before it escalated any further." I walked out of the office, barely acknowledging the secretary as I left, my mind racing with the weight of what had just happened. Mrs. Carver's indifference had ignited something in me. I couldn't rely on them. I couldn't depend on the school system to protect Lily. No, I would do this on my own. I would fight this fight, and I would make sure Lily felt safe. I needed evidence. Proof that this wasn't just Lily's word against Jake's. I had to find out who else had seen it, who else knew about Jake's behavior. I wasn't just going to stand by. Over the next week, I started my investigation. I spoke to the other students who were in Lily's class, careful not to let them know what I was really doing. At first, they were hesitant, unsure if they should get involved. But slowly, I began piecing it together. There were other kids who had seen Jake's taunts, his teasing, his exclusion of Lily from group activities. I spoke to a few of the parents, and one mother shared that her child had mentioned Jake's behavior several times but was too afraid to say anything in front of him. I also took to the internet. Lily, like most kids her age, had a social media account to keep up with friends. She posted pictures of her daily life, her school activities, and the things she enjoyed. I went through her posts carefully, and that's when I found it. One image posted by Lily was a photo of her lunchbox. Beneath it, Jake had written a comment, laughing, saying, "Hope you're not starving after your lunch got taken by me." It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough for me to see that this wasn't just a one-time incident. It was a pattern. It was systemic. But what did I do with this information? I couldn't just confront Jake directly. I couldn't march into the school and accuse him without backing up my claims. I needed a strategy. I needed a plan. So I reached out to a school counselor who I had known for a while, a woman who seemed to care more than most. She agreed to meet with me in private, and together we talked about the steps I could take. It was clear that I would need more than just some pictures or notes. I had to gather everything, every shred of proof that Jake was abusing his power over my daughter. I began recording conversations with Lily, documenting the small things she said about Jake. I asked her questions carefully, so she wouldn't feel pressured. Every day, I felt like I was getting closer to my goal. But every day also felt like a new battle. I was terrified of what Jake might do next, terrified of what might happen if I didn't act soon, but I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry. Angry at the system, angry at the school, angry at everyone who turned a blind eye to Lily's suffering. And most of all, I was angry at Jake. He was going to learn what it meant to mess with my daughter. This wasn't just about stopping Jake's bullying anymore. This was about sending a message to everyone who ever thought they could hurt someone without consequences. This was about standing up for my daughter and for every other child who was suffering in silence. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The plan had started, and nothing would stop me from seeing it through. The day of the meeting with Jake's parents and the school principal arrived, and I had never felt more focused in my life. My palms were slick with sweat, but I kept reminding myself that I was doing this for Lily. This wasn't just a simple school problem anymore. It was a war for her dignity, her sense of self-worth, and her right to feel safe. I was ready. I had the evidence, screenshots of social media posts, pictures of Jake's cruel comments, the reports from other students, and the notes I had taken during my own investigation. I had the truth, and I knew that truth was more powerful than any excuse Jake or his parents could make. I arrived at the school with a clear mind, walking into the principal's office with my head held high. Principal Roberts, a man in his 50s with a thinning hairline and a stiff demeanor, greeted me in a sterile manner. He wasn't the kind of person I expected to care much about my daughter's well-being, but today he had no choice. The door opened and Jake's parents entered. I tried to brace myself as they walked in with that air of superiority that had been honed over years of privilege. Mr. Montgomery, Jake's father, was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself like someone used to getting what he wanted. His wife, Mrs. Montgomery, was just as polished, with her sharp features and carefully crafted smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They both exuded an air of entitlement that made my blood boil. I stood up as they sat down, my heart racing, but my voice steady. "Thank you for meeting with me today," I said, my tone polite but firm. "I've gathered evidence regarding Jake's behavior toward my daughter, and I'm here to ensure that this issue is taken seriously." Mr. Montgomery raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting me to come armed with anything. Evidence? My son is a good kid, Ms. Collins. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding here, he said, his voice smooth and dismissive. I smiled tightly, my fingers wrapping around the stack of papers I had brought with me. I don't think this is a misunderstanding. I have everything I need to show what's been going on. I laid the evidence out on the table, screenshot after screenshot, picture after picture, each one a small piece of the puzzle I had meticulously put together. As I spoke, I pointed to each one. This is Jake's comment on Lily's lunchbox post, laughing about how he stole her food. This is a message where he excluded her from a group activity and made fun of her for being too shy. This is a text from another student who witnessed Jake mocking her on the playground. I could see the color draining from Mr. Montgomery's face as he scanned the papers. Mrs. Montgomery's lips tightened, but she didn't speak. Principal Roberts sat up straighter in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. Ms. Collins, I'm not sure what you're asking for here. Kids can be cruel sometimes. Maybe this is just a phase. No, I said, cutting him off before he could finish his sentence. This isn't a phase. This is bullying, and it's been going on for months. Jake's father shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing. Listen, my son isn't perfect, but he's a good kid. I'm sure Lily's just being too sensitive about this. Kids fight, they argue, it happens. My pulse was pounding in my ears, but I didn't let it show. It doesn't just happen, Mr. Montgomery. This isn't about sensitivity. This is about power, about Jake using his status and popularity to make my daughter feel worthless. She's afraid to go to school because of him. She's scared to face him. And I won't sit by and let this happen anymore. Mrs. Montgomery leaned forward slightly, her voice dripping with condescension. You really expect us to believe that Jake, our son, would do something so cruel? Perhaps you're just overreacting. Lily's a smart girl. I'm sure she could handle it if she just learned to be a little stronger. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. You think this is my overreaction? Is that how you explain away what your son is doing to my daughter? My voice didn't tremble, but the fury inside me was almost overwhelming. You're going to tell me that she's too sensitive? That a little girl who's 8 years old is just overreacting? What about all the other kids who have witnessed Jake's bullying? Are they all just imagining it too? I could see their resolve starting to crack. The polished image of the Montgomerys was beginning to falter in front of the undeniable truth I had laid out for them. Jake's behavior wasn't just a series of isolated incidents, it was a pattern, a deliberate campaign to break Lily's spirit, and no amount of wealth or influence could hide that. Mr. Montgomery's face reddened, but he tried to keep his cool. I'm not here to argue with you, Ms. Collins. My son is a good student, a model kid. You don't know what it's like to have to juggle so much. You're making this seem like something bigger than it is. I stood taller, leaning in slightly. No, you don't know what it's like to be a parent who has to watch their child suffer every day, to watch them cry when they come home because they're terrified of what awaits them at school. I do, and I will not let you, or Jake, or anyone belittle my daughter's pain. This ends now. I turned to Principal Roberts, who had been silent for most of the conversation. You're the head of this school, aren't you? You're responsible for the safety of the students here. You need to intervene. You need to make sure Jake's bullying stops, not just with Lily, but with every other student he's hurting. I'm demanding an apology for my daughter, and I'm demanding action, or I'll take this to the authorities. The silence in the room was suffocating. Jake's parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their high and mighty demeanor finally starting to crumble. I could see the realization dawning on them. This wasn't just some disgruntled mother. This was a woman who would fight for her child, no matter what it took. Finally, Mr. Montgomery spoke, his voice laced with frustration. You think you can just waltz in here and demand things like this? We'll talk to Jake and have him apologize, but this doesn't need to go any further. I didn't flinch. I'm not interested in empty apologies. I'm interested in results. I want you to make sure this stops. I want you to protect my daughter and every other student who might be suffering in silence, and if you don't, I'll take this to the media. I'll make sure the whole town knows what your son has been doing. I left the meeting feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but I knew it wasn't over. I had set the stage for the next chapter. The Montgomerys might try to dismiss me, but they weren't going to get away with this. Not anymore. The room may have been silent in that moment, but outside, the storm was just beginning. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let my daughter be silenced by Jake, or by his parents, or by the system that let it happen. This fight had just begun, and I was going to make sure my daughter got the justice she deserved, and no one was going to stop me. As I walked out of the school with Lily's hand firmly gripped in mine, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was there. The day had been long, tense, and filled with emotions I hadn't been prepared for, but the sense of accomplishment, of knowing that I had fought for my daughter and not backed down when the system had failed her, it was overwhelming. I had done it. We had done it. The suspension that Jake received, though small in the grand scheme of things, was a victory in itself. I had been so afraid that the school, the system, and even Jake's parents would dismiss my concerns as the overprotective worry of a mother who just didn't understand the harmless nature of childhood teasing. But this was different. This wasn't just teasing, this was bullying. And finally, someone had listened. Jake's suspension was, in a way, just a small token of justice. It didn't erase the pain Lily had endured, but it was a reminder that actions have consequences. It wasn't the end, though. Jake might come back to school with a smirk and the same old bravado. His parents would probably try to sweep this under the rug as soon as they could, but what mattered was that they knew I wasn't going to let it slide. What mattered was that my daughter knew I wasn't just her mother, I was her protector. And that, I realized, was the most powerful thing I could be. We got in the car, and the silence between Lily and me spoke volumes. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, not at all. But there was a sense of stillness, as if we were both trying to process the events of the day. I glanced over at her as I started the engine, her wide eyes staring out the window, a hint of relief crossing her face. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice soft as I reached over to squeeze her hand. She turned her head slowly toward me, and for the first time in days, I saw a small smile tug at the corners of her mouth. "Yeah, Mom. I'm okay. I just didn't think we could really do anything about it. I thought it would never end." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had always thought of myself as a strong woman, capable of handling anything life threw my way. But hearing my daughter express that level of doubt, that level of hopelessness, shattered something inside me. How had I not realized how deeply she had been affected? I thought she was just sad, but I hadn't seen how much she had internalized the bullying. I hadn't fully understood just how much it had affected her view of herself. And in that moment, I realized how much I had failed her before. "Lily," I said, my voice steady but with a hint of emotion. "No one, especially not you, should ever feel like they're powerless. Not in school, not at home, not anywhere. You deserve respect, kindness, and a safe place to grow up. You deserve to be heard, and you deserve to be protected. I'll always stand by you, and I'll always fight for you. And today you showed me just how strong you really are." She looked at me with a confused expression for a moment, then slowly nodded. I guess I didn't realize I could do that. Stand up for myself, I mean. I thought I was just being a baby. But then you talked to Jake's parents and the principal, and you didn't back down. I felt proud, I guess. I felt a lump form in my throat. Pride. That was exactly how I felt too. Proud of my daughter, proud of myself, proud of how we had taken control of a situation that had felt so out of our hands just a few days ago. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. We were thriving. We drove in silence for a little while longer, the rhythmic hum of the car's engine accompanying the quiet between us. I couldn't help but think about the journey ahead. This wasn't the end of Lily's struggles, and it wasn't the end of our battle against injustice, but it was a new beginning. We had learned that silence doesn't protect anyone. We had learned that the loudest voice in the room doesn't always make the most impact. Sometimes it's the quiet strength of standing firm in the face of adversity that makes the difference. I was no longer afraid of confrontation. I had found my voice, and I had shown my daughter how to find hers too. We pulled into the driveway and I turned off the car. As we both stepped out, I noticed the sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over our house. It was peaceful here, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a sense of normalcy. "Hey, what do you say we grab some ice cream and watch that movie we've been talking about?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. Lily's eyes brightened, and a giggle escaped her lips. "That sounds perfect, Mom." As we walked into the house, I realized that even though today had been full of confrontation and difficult truths, it had also been full of growth, both for Lily and for me. This wasn't just a victory in a single battle. This was a win for both of us. We had learned that our voices mattered, that we didn't have to take a back seat to anyone, and that we had the power to shape our own narrative. And as we sat down on the couch later that evening, a bowl of ice cream in our laps and the glow of the TV illuminating our faces, I knew this wasn't the last time we'd have to stand up for what was right, but I also knew that we were ready. We had each other, and together we were unstoppable. That night, as Lily drifted off to sleep beside me, I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning. For you, for me, for us, and we're going to be all right."